Hello. How are you doing, Ben?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. This is around the time of the day when the kids downstairs start screaming. This has been like a personal crisis for me. For the past like year,
Hmm.
I keep trying to go downstairs and let the neighbor know, and the mother keeps like telling me, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I mean, are you sure it's us? But like, it's not. If it's not, then it's maybe it is, but like I'm sorry, but like we'll try to. I'll
Yeah.
talk it. Thank you. Just keep stay in touch." And then it's
What
not.
time is it for you?
It's currently 4.
Oh, okay.
And the kid has like a James Hetfield level of pipes. Like the kid has stuff going on. Like it goes on for because he's probably like 16.
Hmm.
So he's screaming. He's a screaming like baritone, playing video games, saying a bunch of expletives. Some words that he shouldn't be using for sure.
Hmm.
And it goes on from about this time for the next like 7 hours. It will also include like chairs dragging. What you'll notice also with the lighting is that there's folks doing construction all around the building, so
Oh
they're
my
actually
God.
just
Yeah.
de-escalating right now from like a rope. So that's why the lighting just shifted a bit. Um, so sometimes you'll hear like drilling, and like hammers and stuff like that.
Everything
Um,
sounds fine right now. It
okay,
doesn't sound bad at all.
good,
Yeah.
good. It's just me that hears it, so it's only my piece that's disturbed. But thankfully, it is not the users, the viewers at home.
These mics are very they usually only capture
Yeah.
right, but like my issue with my mic is honestly like it's too quiet a lot of the time, but it
Mm.
usually doesn't catch anything.
Mm. Yeah. It's like a condenser. These the condenser mics, and then they have a
Mhm.
setting for that too. Like the Yeti has like settings on it, famously.
Oh
So
yeah, when you can choose if it's like a
yeah.
between two people. I don't know. Sometimes the audio's fine. Sometimes the audio's just terrible, and I don't really understand why. I'm not very good with this area.
I'm not as good with recording as I am with like post. Like I'm okay with like post production with audio, but
Mhm.
live it's like kind of a crapshoot for sure, for sure. Anyway, how are you doing? How are you doing,
Uh,
Sisyphus?
yeah, no, I mean I'm good. I've been a little busy. I've been doing a lot more interviews than usual, and
Yeah.
um yeah, but it's been fun. It's been nice. A little bit of running around. The weather's also getting a lot colder here. Like we had a pretty much like middle of summer weather last week, and now it's like getting feels like winter. It's it's autumn, so
Yeah, you're in Toronto, right?
Montreal.
You're in Montreal.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Even better, some would say. Even worse, some would
Even
say.
better. Yeah, well, the winters here are really, really harsh, but the summers here are quite nice. But
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
it's I can't step foot in Canada after the month of September. It's just not for me.
Where are you based again?
I'm in New York. So
Oh, that's pretty close
I'm
actually.
close,
That's not
yeah,
too
but
bad.
it's you would think that the difference wouldn't be that significant, but it really it really is. Like we get
Yeah.
like right now it's like well, I do Fahrenheit, but
Mhm.
it's like 60 degrees right now Fahrenheit.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly how that goes to Celsius, but it
60 degrees Fahrenheit.
it's
I don't know.
it's
Yeah.
just it's like fall, it's like autumn,
Tolerable.
it's
Yeah.
autumnal mid-range weather.
Hmm.
But I imagine over there it's probably colder than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Rarely do I have to convert into Fahrenheit, so it's like I honestly don't know.
It's cold. We'll just use plain word measurements. We'll just say cold
Yes,
and less cold.
exactly.
Uh,
Very scientific. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I've been spending a lot of energy getting into like Palestine debates apparently on here. I'm posting a lot of posts. Yeah, I didn't realize. A lot of folks. I didn't realize we're gonna be this animated in outrage towards the Palestinian resistance. I didn't think that that would be happening on my channel. And I was quite shook at first, and I'm still like now
Do
it's
you see
just
it within your community, or is it people coming from like other places?
it's hard to say because most viewers are silent. Most viewers don't you
Mm-hmm.
don't really see very often, if at all.
Mm-hmm.
But people that have been regulars generally are not the problem. I don't think. But there's been folks that just pop up out of nowhere and call me a tanky. Like I don't know what's going on. So it's like a lot. But it's been a very invigorating and educational experience as well. Been able to get a lot of research done for that. And now I'm looking forward to just being able to chat with you because it's been a while.
Yeah, yeah. When was the last time we talked? Like 2 months ago or somewhere around there?
Yeah, you
Was
had me on
a
your
yeah,
podcast.
podcast. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a great conversation. It was like Buddhism, online politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice. I also had no actual. I don't think I told you this, but I had no notes like for it.
Mm,
I was. You just started mentioning Buddhism at the start, and then we just started talking about that. But
right.
usually, judging by like kind of just how like kind of in alignment in terms of interests and stuff I have
Yeah.
with the person I'm talking to, the less notes I'll have because I just want the conversation to kind of flow naturally. I'll just have questions or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one I was just like, you just seemed like easy to converse with. So
Oh.
just and I thought it was a pretty solid episode overall.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Hmm.
I thought it was I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was a lot of fun. Um, we got to dive into a lot of interesting, like sort of interpretations and parallels with Buddhism and other philosophical ideas, and we talked a bit about leftist philosophical ideas and where they can potentially coalesce with Buddhism, which is something that is near and dear to my heart as a kind of project right now. And probably will be for a while. So that was really foundational for me.
Hmm.
I found it very good. I found it very fun as a conversation and very helpful. I
That's good.
found the comments people seem to like it too. You know, people seem to like our convo. There was like one comment that was like, "Elliot is so early in his journey. He's so brave to be speaking." I was like, "Is that a compliment? I don't know what's going on.
I don't know what that means
Don't know what
exactly,
that
but
means."
yeah.
Instead of like, he's too rare to be speaking about this, and he's too early to be speaking about this in his journey. What a brave kid. I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
I think there was some implications of me like like not knowing my shit. So today I'm gonna be on my shit. Today I'm gonna show that person. I'm gonna show that
Yes.
person for sure.
Uh, I mean, sometimes there's just comments. I almost find it weird when I meet people that are very much like I have my haters and I have my fans because I'm like I get so many comments where I don't know what the stance is and I don't know if I'm just bad at reading comprehension sometimes. But it's as long as they're offering a new perspective or they seem to have taken something away from whatever was talked about.
Yeah.
That's all that matters, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. As long as people are having a good time, as long as people are having a good time, I guess. And it's I I would say that the most of the comments that I end up interacting with are ones that I'm like puzzled by. Yeah, that's in that vein. They're ones that I'm like, I don't know why my volume is like my input volume is consistently elevating. I don't know if you're noticing that.
Sounds okay on my end.
Okay, because I keep trying to adjust it to go back down, and I'm seeing on the left. So, folks, if you have if there's any issues with the audio, my sound, let me know because I cannot get my microphone input volume to stay stable. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that is one of the hardest parts about being a YouTuber, and even in the videos themselves, is kind of figuring out like feeling like you're never ready to talk about anything, like feeling like there's so many people that are more knowledgeable about this and more prepared to talk about this than I am, and I have to make the decision to put it out, not only just to put it out but also to receive some sort of audience and to receive some sort of profit from it, because we monetize. And it's kind of scary. It's like it requires a lot of confidence that sometimes we don't even really have, because you just I don't know how humanly possible it is for folks to like, unless you're some people do it right. They do like a YouTube channel where they talk about one specific thing, specific aspect of something or whatever,
Hmm.
and they've already studied it for a long time, so they just know what to talk about and how to talk about it. But for most of us, there's at least some degree of like, am I even supposed to be talking about this right now? Am I the right person to say this? Am I doing this the right way? You know?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a I more and more I kind of treat my videos on my platform as like a dialogue. Like I definitely would never
Mm.
post something where, simultaneously I don't feel like I've at least given some effort in terms of, you know, doing my research and knowing what I'm talking about,
Right.
but also being fully aware that this isn't like an open and closed case, which is
Right.
something I inherently don't like about the video essay format because it's it does sound very pretentious that it's very kind of like talking down to people a lot of the time because it sounds very like open and closed.
Yeah.
And but I do, I'll read the comments and sometimes I agree with comments that were critical of my views or at least how I presented my argument. And then I just kind of like adjust and like learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also at the same time, I don't think if it's egregiously wrong. I don't
Mm.
think it's like a something to necessarily address then and there. It's just
Yeah.
to kind of help me build my own like worldview and how I think of things. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like a dialectic process with the audience. I think it becomes kind of an issue when you begin to think like I need to know all of this, or even worse, I think I know everything and I'm gonna make this because then your ego's involved, and if somebody criticizes it, it's like a that's when you see the I think a lot of the
Yeah.
infighting and stuff is people trying to adjust around arguments that were like at the end of the day probably a little bit weak in their foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a definitely there can be a sense of inflated self confidence. That especially for a lot of folks that have the anonymity of being, YouTube commenters and not putting themselves out there. I feel like there's a sort of power to the position of the critic as well. Like there's a power to being in the position of being like on the outside saying you're not legitimate, you're fake, you're wrong, right? It's a little bit easier to do that than to be like this is what I think and this is how I feel. And I think that for that reason, that's part of why criticism of stuff and like bashing stuff is a great YouTube tradition as well. Whereas one of my struggles is just trying to learn how to be productive with my knowledge
Hmm.
with what I try to put out there and educate people with, and not try to rehash what other people are saying while also not being overly confident in my ability to just generate the truth out of nowhere, and not
Hmm.
necessarily have to do enough research, right? And you're doing a lot of work now that is focused more on leftist politics, in complement with or in tandem with continuing to do philosophical stuff that relates to sort of personal issues, love and meaning and things like this. So that also strikes me as like something that must be quite a tricky thing to deal with, right? Like there's some level of nerves that I would have if I were, even I'm becoming more political with my content too, and it's like this thing of like, okay, well, this is not going to be as popular necessarily, and it's also going to be much easier to criticize me for, and I'm not sure if I'm ready, like if I really know what I'm talking about, maybe I should just let other people talk about it, kind of thing. So tell me about that process with doing going in this direction with your channel.
I mean, I would say that the channel has, I wouldn't say always, but I'd say for the last 3 years, there is an inherent political aspect to it because I do believe, this was something that I originally was studying political science and I went into psychology.
Mm.
Um, I recognized that the mental health of the individual is also like in tandem with like how individuals kind of take responsibility for their own well-being.
Yeah.
It is also, very much determined by institutional barriers, by society, by the environmental context, and and that's not just like mental health, but there's so many studies that show just basic physical health is primarily determined by like socioeconomic status. Like being poor can be like literally like a death sentence in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
and that made me go, okay, well, I also do care about like if I care about the psychology and well-being of people, then I'm going to inherently also care about the institutions. And I don't think the kind of primary economic model that most of the world aligns by right now is satisfying well-being at large. And I also think forms of psychology have been co-opted by the system in terms of promoting self-improvement, productivity, the idea of the burnout society, where we need to
Right.
take full responsibility for our mental health. So there's always been, I guess, a left-leaning perspective throughout my videos,
Yeah.
because I did not want to become one of those channels that was just self-improvement and making people feel better. I do want to make people feel better, but it's I don't want people to take the burden of all of their unhappiness onto themselves. You
Yeah.
want them to realize that they also have some sort of political effect and social effect.
Yeah.
And but kind of getting more into Buddhism, there was that idea of like right livelihood that
Yeah.
especially kind of impacted me because I was thinking, how do I perceive myself in terms of kind of creating compassionate change or impacting people in a positive, kind way, and
Right.
actually leading to something that like I care about, and the whole idea of like the heart and the hand and the mind all being in agreement. And then at the same time, I think just naturally I'm consuming a lot of like online leftist content. Like I'm especially interested in streamers. Like
Mm.
that's just a phenomenon that I find, as we're streaming, it is something I find really interesting. Um, and I think that's kind of like, first of all, just looking at my own position, I'm like, okay, I don't think I've actually done very much in total. And it's very easy for me to kind of just make somewhat like the same video over and over again and make a certain amount of money and kind of say the right things and do like just enough to be seen as morally righteous while still making money. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to necessarily do that. And at the same time, I don't really know what to do. And is this platform inherently kind of feeding into the things that I wouldn't consider are compassionate? Like, where's like, can we change how we conduct ourselves on this site, both as like content creators and audience members, to for it to lead to some sort of constructive action? Um, is it already doing that, or is it just inherently like impossible to do that? There's more than likely literally no absolute answer to that, but it was an
Mm.
interesting issue for me to research. And then
Mm.
I made that video, The Revolution Will Not Be Live Streamed, kind of knowing full well, and this is kind of talking about the dialectic process, knowing full well that there would be a follow-up because it was kind of like a provocative video, that was supposed to at least get some people like talking about this, because
Mm.
I do want to know what other influencers think of their own position.
Right.
And immediately what I recognized is that the initial reaction from some people was what I was criticizing is that people take any sort of antagonism, even if it's not directed to them, but the very hint of antagonism towards what they're doing in their argument as just of like a personal insult.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't I found there was kind of a mixed reaction of honest engagement with that video. And then also at the same time, the reactions that I found were constructive, helped me kind of hone in on my arguments a little bit more and make it a bit more precise. Both talking to like influencers, reading comments, and I've been involved in like a series of interviews with this PhD student who's writing his
Mm.
dissertation on the online left. And his argument is that especially Twitch streaming, he seems to be very centered on like Hassan,
Mm.
um, has led to very positive political outcomes and is like it's a very good use of the platform kind of
Mm.
already. And so we've had a very kind of interesting, very polite kind of arguments and stuff, but
Mm.
I think it's helped us like both inform our opinions on the matter a lot more. And he's brought up a lot of things that I hadn't considered, and I think I've done the same. So
Right.
that's been the general process. Plus, I've been able to talk to a few different streamers, and I'm still going to talk to some more streamers regarding this topic, because I think the best thing to do is to actually just ask other people. And it is kind of doing something I don't think a lot of video essayists do. And usually, if they do this, they just like only talk in their specific bubble. And
Mm,
I am trying to reach out to quite a few different people to actually see what they think of their platform and the infighting and the level to which they think it's constructive and do they actually think that the online left can rally behind a specific thing despite all of these kind of identity issues.
right.
So it's I don't know. Like I'm just I wouldn't say I've been nervous about it because I have a decent amount of confidence in how I communicate, and I'd like to think I'm genuinely willing to listen to other people
Mm,
and also change my opinion. And I think by just doing that, um, most people, if they're like good faith, they're going to respect that and they're going to like open up and we can have like a solid dialogue. So that's kind of been my general experience with this whole fun little project.
it sounds like it's been very well considered. Um, and you don't seem like the kind of person that also kind of does things without thinking about them. You know,
Sometimes, yeah.
you seem like you put like a good amount of thought into what you do, um, and into life. You know,
Thank you.
and I think it's I think part of that can also be a bit exhausting. You know, like I try to be that way as well, and I'm only recently starting to learn lessons about taking breaks, which people have always talked to me about. You know, it's one of those things that you hear about and you kind of know about, but it doesn't sink in the right way. It just feels like something that's almost foreign to you. Like, I know that I should take breaks, but when I do take breaks, I don't enjoy them. I don't know how to take a proper break. Sometimes I'm not afforded a break, right? And these kinds of things, like, I'm starting to learn how to put to the wayside through really trying to build a sense of real self confidence, that I guess I never realized was missing, or maybe it's something that got especially bad post pandemic. But I think I always have been a person that's quite sensitive to the opinions of others, you know, um, and I don't think that that's something that like I think that that's fairly common.
Mhm.
I think that most of us are that way, and most of us kind of learn in trying to become less sensitive to that, you know, more independent or less worried about what people think. A lot of us just kind of don't do it right. We kind of half do it and end up doing like this kind of sometimes like overly combative thing for a lot of people. For other people, just like become very overly, I guess you could say, people pleasing in the sense, to sort of avoid having to think or deal with those situations. Um, and especially in being a YouTuber, this kind of it kind of reveals to you how impossible that is and how kind of much of a strain on you it can be. Um, and you're a channel that, especially like in the beginning of your sort of rise, your rise to fame, um, was, and I know you've talked about this, uh, uh, you know, sort of categorized as like a philosophy channel, right? In the more generic, let's say, apolitical sense, and maybe you attracted an audience at points unintentionally that was more looking for kind of the self-helpy, kind of center right, kind of Jordan Peterson esque view of philosophy, and nowadays, a lot of the work that you're doing, it feels like almost a continual sort of response to that of like saying like I'm not going to allow that to sort of be what you think I'm doing, um, and I'm curious if it's hard for you to deal with the kinds of pushback you must have gotten over the years and probably still get, that you're getting too woke, or like that you're injecting all these sorts of left-wing politics, um, and not giving people sort of what they want in terms of the kind of run-of-the-mill school of life kind of thing. Was that a challenge for you, like emotionally, mentally?
Mm, No, like I think as long as as long as my message is as long as it's consistent, I think that's the thing. And that's going back to the idea of like listening to other people's opinions. Um
Yeah.
you can be conservative, and I feel like and I honestly, there's some level of pride I find in like getting comments even now, where I think it's been quite a while since like I think how like what my political views are kind of like known, that I'll still
Yeah.
get comments of people like complaining that I've all of a sudden like I went woke or something, because it does mean that these people have been watching my videos for like a while, and there's been like some level of like consistency in terms of how I'm relating ideas, and these ideas are somewhat, I would say critical of certain status quo institutions.
Mm,
And these people were watching these videos, not recognizing that that was, you know, I guess some way like antagonistic to their ideology.
right.
And so that means that they were exposed to those ideas. Whereas if
Mm,
I think if I made a hard stance, and I don't mean this in like some conspiratorial, like secretly trying to, I'm just trying to show how these arguments like develop, like very
mm,
like show your work, like um that I could just without like openly advertising exactly what political ideology I ascribe to, but actually genuinely like rationalizing my way there. Um, I just hope that I mean, at least they're exposed to the ideas, and then they have every right to whatever they want to like think afterwards. But and if they do also like notice some inconsistencies in what I'm saying,
mm,
all that does is just like further kind of adjust and help, and it helps me adapt like my ideas and my worldview. So it's just like the fact that you always, for me, I always have to leave it like kind of open
yeah.
to be like to destabilize my opinions, just so that it's I guess it's like an immune system thing where it's like you need to kind of have like some level of foreign intruders to come in, and then you can see how strong it actually is. But I don't the comments, unless they're like, I think it's usually like ad hominem comments that are just like mean, but those are just like mean things to say. If it's like my ideas and stuff like that, I think I'm like removed enough that I'm like you know part of the main thing is like I like to think I'm pretty like married to the truth, and I'm trying to find the
Mm,
truth, and you really have to kind of let go of the ego if you want to really find the truth.
right.
That's where most people get bogged down, is like at some point they fully like stick their identity into one specific thing, and that is that thing,
Yeah.
and that's completely fine. But that means you're going to come across certain, you're going to make it very hard for you to actually adopt like an even stronger position in some ways, that can encapsulate challenges and anomalies.
Mm. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's definitely a very healthy approach too, to observe like, oh, like it turns out, there's some other people that are still watching that are, disagreeing, and there's one sense of it that could be like a person saying, "Oh, I need to adjust what I'm doing because these people keep seeing my videos and
Mhm.
commenting on it. I don't want to come off as friendly to them." But for you, it's this thing of like, I want to continually sort of lay the bait out there to some degree, to where my like I'm conveying my ideas in this perceptibly universal way, and it can be interacted with or taken in these different directions, while also sort of clarifying and never doing something that goes against what I actually believe in. Just that when I put this stuff out there, that it has like this like it's this version of what I am, right, and what I believe that is perceptibly more universal, right? Perceptibly like something that people can interact with across the political spectrum, across sort of informational spectrums, um, and yet then when I know that if people start saying that I turned woke or whatever, I'm also that's also a way that I know that I am asserting my politics, but also still remaining giving that universality. And just this is the reaction of people that are just having something snap in their
Mhm.
head of being like, oh shit, like I didn't realize, I thought he was cool, and then something just
Yeah,
happens where they're like, oh, it just turns out he's super woke or whatever. Yeah.
yeah. No, like, and the one thing I've noticed in some discussions with streamers is that whenever I ask, like, are you willing to kind of open up and talk to people that you have like disagreements with, they're immediate. They never say yes or no. It's like an immediate kind of like, well, people will think that I do this. Well, people will expect that I'm doing this. People will start to believe that I'm like doing this for this reason. People will like think I'm this.
Mm.
And it's like, first of all, it's not answering the question. And secondly, it's like a pathological obsession with like what other people perceive you doing.
Mm.
And like, I get it, like, because it's uncomfortable, but you have to recognize like that idea of the digital panopticon that a lot of
Mm.
people have talked about. And I think it
Yeah.
comes from like Byung-Chul Han introduces it. People bring up that idea of the digital panopticon and they use it to kind of complain, like where it's like, oh, like I'm like everybody sees me, I don't see them. Um, but also we profit off of it and we do in some way have some agency in terms of whether we want to be in it or not. And I don't mean this in
Mm.
terms, I mean you could expand this argument towards everybody's kind of in a digital panopticon, like everybody has an Instagram, Facebook, but the us as like creators, we especially are like we've made it like our livelihood.
Yeah.
So like you kind of have to, if you're going to constantly try to conform and predict and manage yourself in terms of how this anonymous general will is perceiving you, you're not going you're not, I don't think you're honestly conducting yourself in some way. Like I think you're really limiting yourself in terms of actually getting closer to the truth or getting closer to knowledge, and also in interacting and collaborating with people if you want to make some sort of constructive change.
Mm. Yeah. I'm just a bit struck by the sort of certainty, the sort of like you just have this way of discussing things where it's like, yes, that is correct. Like I did, you've internalized all the good things, like, which
I
is
mean,
good.
no, but I'm also willing to like. I want to keep like. That's what I also realized when I was just doing video essays. I'm not really talking to people, but I think it's a lot better to talk to people and have like active
Yeah.
discussions. And recently, I traveled. I met some other like YouTubers, but I was also meeting with a lot of my like non-online friends,
Mm-hmm.
like quote unquote real world friends.
Yeah.
And I really cherish those relationships because those people sometimes don't care, let alone they don't even really respect what I do at all. Like they're just like he's doing this like weird thing. And then when I was hanging out with like the YouTuber people, they were like so like a lot of it is based on like status and like and it's very like very much like talking about this person did this person did that. It was kind of like I really like them too, but it was also very like kind of high school and who's talking to who and who's doing
Oh.
this. And I was like, and I remember like sitting down and one person was even like, "You're this person that like you made that video that everybody was like talking about." I was like, I wasn't even aware of that because I'd been like, hey, hanging out with like my other friends were playing basketball,
Yeah.
playing pool, like going out to eat, and it was really making me realize like I do value having that kind of that grounded aspect where you realize none of this or I won't say none of this, but a large percentage of this really doesn't matter and
Yeah.
really doesn't like reach across the aisle in terms of leaving the digital space. And the
Mm.
most amazing part of it was I was taking the train back and the person sitting next to me like taps me on the shoulder and she asked me like, oh, what I was reading. And I just told her, oh, it's like for this, like I make YouTube videos. So it was like it's just for that. And she was like super, she was like, oh my God, you make YouTube videos? That's crazy. Like
Mm.
I watch YouTube for like cooking and stuff like that. And then I asked her like, what do you do? And she was like a head doctor at the kids hospital at the ICU thing. And so I was like, I'm like, that's crazy. Like to me, like I want to talk about that. So I got to hear her kind of like her stories about like when she was working there during the pandemic and like,
Right.
how it is just interacting with patients in general and kind of the politics of it and everything. And then the funniest thing was like at the very end of like when we were leaving the train, she's like, "Oh, you have to show me your channel." And she opens up her YouTube app. She has no idea how to navigate YouTube. She's subscribed to one channel that's BuzzFeed, and she says, "I don't even know what that is." And she and I was like, it was so funny because I'm like, well, this is somebody that actually I don't know very much about this person, but they actually deal pretty much only in tangible real world things, and they're
Right.
actually doing things and there can be so much Twitter discourse and just so much just talking about this and that, and it gets to that point of I guess like hyper reality where it's just you start thinking that that's more real,
Yeah.
and I think that it was a very touching moment in a way, and a very humbling moment. And I maybe that's where that certainty comes from, is like if you're just online and you're constantly just getting information, and people's opinions are changing constantly, and there's always that instability, which is like healthy in terms of like intellectual growth to a certain point, but there lacks any sort of stability, and stability is kind of what is needed in order for like change to occur, or like action to occur. Like you eventually have to kind of like commit to something, like while still adjusting to things. Like it is like kind of a um kind of back and forth process. But I think we're just mostly on the kind of unstable, constant like stimulation aspect of it.
Yeah, I think I keep saying I get distracted because I keep saying yeah as a response. Um, I find that being online, hyper reality is a great way to describe it because there's also an intensification of everything. Partially because there's no a lot of the mechanisms that you use in a in-person scenario, socially commuting, whatever, are not there online, and everything is sort of a gallery where everything is sort of the same weight. And to give weight to a post on Twitter, there's no way that you can automatically then not give the same weight to every other post, right? Because they all look the same. Um, there's just like a way that these kinds of things um, breed intensity, which is part of the charm, one may say, but part of also the design. And the intensity is something that I have been astounded by in terms of like when I take that step away and I go, hang out with my IRLs and try to get more grounded and stuff. Like even like just like not playing video games, like not being in that like sort of digital space. Like there's a way that everything is so much like less intense in a lot of senses, especially when you're around people you're comfortable with, where everything's just like, oh, cool, right? And
Mhm.
um, like conversely, like when you try to bring that energy that you have when you're interacting with the online world to the offline world, then it becomes like impossible to get by because like the level of hyper analysis and the level of constant engagement and constant search for entertainment and the level
Mhm.
of sort of uh, high octane interpretation of other people's comments and their behaviors. It makes everything feel like it makes it really hard to have friends. It makes it really hard to like enjoy the simple things.
Mhm.
And so I do think there's something to just it's not even about like going outside. It's just about just not being online to a degree, even if it's like cooking or if it's like doing yoga or whatever, taking a nap.
Mhm.
That is like, and what's funny is like people just used to live like that. Like that was it. There was no other world that they stepped into online. I mean, if they wanted to, maybe they would read like a book, or write
Mhm.
letters. Folks would get a letter once every like year from somebody in a different part of the world. They would open their mail, and that was like the biggest thing, if you can imagine, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I guess there's something to the degree to which like the way that we exist online is something almost like completely foreign and completely detaching from the human experience, um, which I think is part of what makes the philosophy work. Like when you do YouTube videos about philosophy and about life, it makes it so appealing to people because there's so many people that are sort of consistently in these places and experiencing this kind of hyper real reality that are transfixed with the idea of just the reality in front of them, right?
Mhm.
And that's something that if you're grounded, you can help present to people a lot better. Whereas if you're very online, let's say, and especially in like a social media way, that it's just very difficult. Um, and so I find that maybe you're just like a real like down to earth guy.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe just super chill, or I don't know. You've been doing it for so long as well. Do you have like a schedule or like a structured way that you approach the time you spend doing Sisyphus stuff and then the time you spend doing your everyday life stuff?
I mean, I use it as like a tool, and I think that's like the main thing that is
Hmm.
important regarding online spaces in general, is that it like definitely not going like the Kaczynski route. It is a like digital technology is extremely useful and I think beneficial
Yes.
in a lot of ways. Um,
I do get
but
Kaczynskiites in my
yes.
comment
Oh
section
yeah,
now
me too, me
again.
too. Yeah. But it's been basically turned into more of an escape than a tool. And I do think that's the same for creators also. Creators could use like these digital spaces and communities that they made as a tool to connect with other people, as a tool. Like for me, like I specifically use my channel and I've always used that as an excuse to research topics and questions that I have for myself.
Hmm.
Like, and I think that's like the ideal job for me at least because I'm a very like curious person. So I'm making a living off of like exploring these ideas basically, which is nice. And in terms of that, that means an excuse to a lot of the time, like log off and I can, I'll
Hmm.
go read a book. I'll talk to other people about these things, writing and so forth. But, the online space acts as a tool there because it justifies kind of why I'm doing it in like a
Yeah.
material way. And then
Yeah.
also connecting with other people. But then at the end of I think that there's a point, and I do see this with like online left discourse where it's not being used as a tool by the online left. I think it's more so being used as an escape. And
Hmm.
I don't think it's like a conscious decision. I think it's just the dramatics, like the theater of when somebody says something that the other person disagrees with, and then there's like 20 or
What?
30 videos in
What?
response to that. Yeah. And it's like if we actually started to respect attention and time as genuine resources, I don't think we'd be doing that as much. Like it's almost like if people realized like the sort of urgency in terms of a lot of issues in the world and how and maybe I'm just like maybe it's just my feed, but like a lot of content generated doesn't really involve any sort of constructive action towards these things. At the most, they're like think pieces, which are useful to an extent.
Yeah.
Um, Most of the time, it's just people correcting other people or accusing some perceived wrongness they saw in this other person's view,
Right.
and I think that that's useful. Like that's fine, and but it has to work in tandem with like genuine action. It has to, and that goes back to using these digital spaces above all as tools for the real world and not as an escape from the real world.
Right. I think there's something scary as well about, and this is a very, I feel very just, liberal dem, like 50-year-old politician saying this, but like there's just something to the level of disinformation. It's staggering. It's staggering, and it's staggering how fast it happens, and you can see it happen to yourself, right? There's so much of it happening with the situation in Gaza that it's like you see in real time people just believe and then push a narrative without having had any sort of real engagement with it,
Mhm.
and it fundamentally shifts their argument in some ways that is so prescient. It's like so important that like it would fall apart without that, and
Mhm.
yet there's like very little effort, and this is one of the things we try to work on is like literacy, right? And how do you engage with stuff and learn, what's the right way to engage with information and stuff. But I do think there's, I don't know if you agree, but there's something to all of this that also is really starting to get people more and more desperate to get off social media. I think that there's something that is like bubbling that is like um, a social, like there's definitely people that are going to be online. They're very online, but there's something to a slow kind of build of people being like less and less, like more and more jaded by it, and more excited at the prospect of painting in their room again. Like, there's something about the internet age that we predict a lot of these things outward a lot, right? And we say like, wow, information is never going to be the same, and then this is like everything's changing, and people are never going to be this way again. I mean, the other day I heard people saying that people are no longer going to read books anymore. I was seeing some tweets discourse about like the entire way that we perceive literacy is going to have to change because they're just no longer. And I'm like, in the back of my mind, and maybe it's an optimistic thing, I find that the more that you get absorbed into it, the more you start to feel this desire to get away from it, and that there's becoming a sort of social fabric based on that.
Mhm.
Even on social media, there's just like the whole phenomenon of get offline, right, or whatever, touch grass, seems like this kind of reaction on the behalf of people that are like more and more hyper aware that this is escapism and this is what it is. One of the biggest topics that I feel like if you just post something about this, you make a video about this tomorrow, it's still gonna get like 5 million views. Like, it's always like this. This is one of the ones that gets ate up by the algorithm. Is social media addiction, right? We're throwing all of our life into content. Everything is content. We're over consuming content, dopamine, da da da. Like, this is something that is a huge topic of the past couple of years, and it's, I think, part of the thing of a phenomenon of people who come online and who are online very often, who either subconsciously or consciously are really drawn to the idea of finally being able to get away from it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, like I would agree that I think that there's a push towards sort of this apathy,
Yeah.
and or I mean, I think it's caused by apathy, this push towards getting offline,
Mm.
and I think that that's a failure on the part of social media. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't like champion it. Also, I think it's a form of disassociation, like
Mm.
and a type of anti-intellectualism, where it's like I don't need to know. Like a
I
lot
ain't
of people
reading
I
all
talk
that.
to. Yeah, yeah, that and just like, I'm so much happier now that I'm not on social media. It's like I mean, that's good. Like, it's good that you're happier, especially in the West. Um, we can do that. Like, we're able to do that quite easily. Um, but I think that's why I've been kind of concerned lately with, no, we actually have a very good tool that we could use for genuine action. And I also think there's a lot of things, there's a infinite amount of things right now that require immediate action. We're just not using it properly. And I don't even mean that in I mean, there's obviously some ideology entrenched in it. But I don't mean that in like a specific, like, if we use social media this way, it'll cause this like utopian vision. I just mean that there's like specific things going on that would require some level of like local engagement. And if you had enough people pay attention to it, then there would be some like constructive action. And I think when people continually engage in those things, that apathy will disappear.
Yeah.
Um, but these platforms are inherently, you know, they're owned by
Nazis.
billionaires. And
Yes.
their own,
I mean,
their own, yeah,
Twitter is, yeah. I mean, Elon's like doing blood and soil memes. Like, it's like over. It's Joe over there. But like,
yeah. Well, like I would just say like blanket. They're owned and they're conducted under
yeah,
like a profit incentive.
yeah,
And what's profitable is people infighting, people bickering, and not actually doing anything.
yeah.
Um, so
Do you find
it
capitalism comes up when you're like a lot of the videos, and I think this is a central part of something that allows the videos to sort of be accessible to like other audiences, and like right wingers and stuff like that, is like there's a way to engage with like everyday life and the things that are happening that isn't like digging into some attempt at dialectical materialism or some attempt at Marxism, or anti-capitalism. But do you find also when you're writing these things, like when you're writing videos and when you're um, conducting these interviews too, that there's like you keep running into like the capitalism wall, right? Like the whole thing of like, oh shit, capitalism, like here you go again, right? Because I feel that way off. I mean, that's like become my whole thing. I've gotten comments that are like, this guy's videos are all the same, because I'm turning into channels just like, well, here, let's do capitalism, let's talk about capitalism. Do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's undeniable that capitalism is it's kind of the system right now. But I also fear that if it was to ever be replaced or something, that whatever that system is will just be kind of the next thing that
Right.
does all of the same stuff. I've been reading like Escape from Evil by Ernest Becker,
Hmm.
and his kind of argument is that both Marxists and conservatives kind of miss the mark in terms of defining human nature.
Hmm.
Conservatives inherently see humans as self-interested, selfish, driven by like I got to get my own.
Right.
And the whole argument is if under competition that it'll lead to like profit and flourishing and stuff like that. Marxism, his interpretation, it's not all Marxists, but they don't really focus on the psychological element of humans. It's very institutional, and humans are kind of more of like a blank slate, kind of the Rousseau like noble
Hmm.
savage, where if you remove all of these institutional barriers, then humans will naturally be free.
Hmm.
And this goes back to before capitalism, religion. Like a
Yeah.
lot of major religions kind of were doing similar things where they were keeping people institutionally like chained. And if we want to create something new, we have to consider that it's a little bit beyond capitalism. Why is there this sort of proclivity in human nature towards unfreedom?
Yeah.
And Becker's argument is like obviously a dark one. Everything that we do is to deny our deaths, and we are constantly trying to symbolically transcend our deaths. And we feel kind of I mean, like I'm obviously a big fan of existentialism. That's
Hmm.
how this channel started, but um, it's that idea of kind of existential guilt of like if we feel almost guilty that we exist for no reason really, and then we're just going to die.
Yeah.
So we have to ascribe to certain things that will at least symbolically justify our existence now because it will lead to some sort of supposed continuation.
Yeah.
And so he was an anthropologist, so he looked at like ritual sacrifices. Rituals were ways in which we could kind of order our reality, control things, and sacrifice. So it alleviates that guilt in some way. And then you basically see like major religions become kind of a gigantic, more systematic process of this. And you see kind of more large scale sacrifices. And then with capital, with money, you see something interesting where we realize we can like generate like a surplus of this thing that kind of holds this neutral universal value that is definite and can be exchanged like anywhere. And capitalism is kind of the whole idea of like the more we have of that, the more we are kind of symbolically protected from death because it's like you are like you're kind of transcending things. Like you literally materially can survive longer now that you have money. So it's a very effective and adaptive and pluralistic system that can adapt a lot of other what he calls like immortality ideologies, other ideologies that we've built up to continue justifying our existence. It can kind of underlie a lot of those things, um, and it has obviously led to some of the most major atrocities because people they want to make money at the end of the day and they can justify pretty much anything under that. And his argument is basically at the end of it that Marxism should consider the fact that there are psychological, um, spiritual dimensions to human nature, whether spirituality actually exists, but there's a sort of yearning towards that. And it should unite um, with these schools of thought if it wants to make sure that we aren't just replicating systems of unfreedom. And he basically just makes the case that if conservatism thinks that human nature is inherently selfish and Marxism thinks that, human nature is inherently corrupted by other systems and acts as a blank slate, Becker would say that human nature is inherently weak and fragile and terrified. And
Right.
that's how we should analyze our reality. So
Yeah.
so evil therefore is it comes from a place of fear. So
Yeah.
that would be where I think things come up a lot, and then capitalism is one of those things that I think is based on that system or
Yeah.
that idea of human nature.
Yeah. I think I've done I've been referencing ethics of ambiguity a bunch because I was reading it for the upcoming video. So when I was talking to Foreign on here, we were talking about that a bit too. I'm the embodiment of the meme of like guy who watches Boss Baby, and it's the only movie he's ever watched. This reminds me a lot of Boss Baby. Like that's me. Every time I'm
Ethics of
reading something,
ambiguity is that's a very good paper.
it's good. I mean, I think the conceptuality, like the term of ambiguity, and just that as a concept being what sort of pulls humans, Beauvoir says man, but like humans into different directions of clinging to ideas. It's a very similar concept of like the trying to secure an immortality. It's the idea of like rather than immortality being the case, it's one of a sense of security that reduces or rids oneself of dealing with ambiguity, which Beauvoir says like that's the sort of charge of philosophy throughout history and all of this, and that's where you get all the kinds of varieties of folks who will cling to a religious sort of sect and not question anything outside of it, not because they have done some sort of epistemological deep thought every day, but like precisely for the opposite reason of like they it's hard to do that. It's like very very self-inhibiting and damaging sometimes to like the way that you carry yourself out in everyday life if every day you're spending hours thinking about like why am I doing this, or like is this true, is this correct, is this the right way to do this, right? But if you eschew that, if you eschew that sense of critical thinking about the ambiguity and confronting it, and then you put yourself in the direction of essentially trying to make yourself back into this childhood state, which leads you to having to confront like all this darkness without having any tools for it, because you fundamentally have hindered your ability to even recognize it. And then on the other hand, you can't also be the constant philosopher who's always just thinking about whether things are things and what's correct or not correct, without having to embody that into action in the actual world. There has to be, and this is like Freire talks about, like liberation as a praxis. I think he's talking about the same thing in a lot of ways. Buddhism, I think, talks about this in a lot of ways, where the concept of absolute truth versus like the relative truth, the non-self, but then also relatively, obviously, I'm a person, right? There has to be a thing that you carry on that you're like, this is how I'm gonna roll with it this month, or this year, or this particular set of years. Like this is the set of things that I'm gonna stand by and work around, and I'm gonna continuously work on without, compromising necessarily. But I'm also going to continually engage with the part of me that says like, is this connected to the absolute truth, or is there something that I'm missing? Is there something deeper? The ambiguity. And I think even Marxism, like, I think that the orthodox Marxist position is more so the one that's sort of like, everything comes down to material, like sort of an idea of like material interests and material conditions. And once those material conditions are changed, then that fundamentally will change people. And all we have to do is then secure kind of positionality that fundamentally changes those material interests, and then boom, right? And I think that there's a degree to which it's true, right? Because it's the same thing we say of like, yeah, give everybody healthcare and give everybody, the same amount of money and possession of material, like the production, to survive. You would be shocked at how well that'll do for their psyches, right? But there's also a degree to which it, the Marxist humanist sort of analysis is one that looks at the idea of alienation, for instance, because Marx was doing a lot of this work too, to think about sort of what the human soul is meant to do at points, mostly in like sort of notebook stuff. The economic and philosophic manuscripts is one that gets talked about a lot, and it's like foundational for like the Marxist humanist. But it's that idea of like, okay, well, there is a type of humanism that we have to think about. There is a type of, at the very least, we have to consider and flesh out some ideas of what it means to truly be human, and what it means to flourish as a human versus what it means to suffer as a human, and what is inhumane, and why these sorts of things are intimately connected with the systems of production that we have, right? And what we can do not only to just like change the material production in the crude sense, but also in the understanding sense of like, this is why it happens, and these are the kinds of things we have to change in our souls in order for it to happen, right? um, and I think, yeah, there's a degree to which like people have to. I mean, this is one of the things that you run into, and I'm curious about this idea of doom too, that I've been talking about a lot, like doomerism. But you kind of run into a lot of people when you're on a left wing politically, that are like, well, it's never going to happen because people are too evil, and like we're all screwed and everything sucks. And this kind of thing is sort of, perhaps it's like this interest in having some sort of easier way to describe why the world is what it is and what's going to happen, and also like to sort of see certain things as impossible so that one cannot have to grapple with all the difficulties that come with making that thing happen, right? Like, if it's possible that we can change the world and eventually all share the means here and live peacefully, what the hell do we have to do in order to get there? And then what the hell do I have to do? Like, what do I have to do to consider what I'm doing for my job, what I'm consuming, what kind of clothes I'm wearing, who I'm listening to, right? And that work is exhaustive, and it's got no straightforward answer to it, and it's often, you know, falls apart when you think about it deeply. Like, a lot of it can, through analysis, become, you know, seem like mundane.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think existentialism often can be tied in with nihilism, and that's one of the central things also, like, ethics of ambiguity kind of addresses, is this kind of reading of nihilism that is attached to existentialism too, of like, well, if God isn't real, then what's the point of anything, and there's no morality or anything. But one of the biggest things that I come across in my audience, and I'm sure you do too, is this sense of people being like, there's no point and everything sucks and we should all just kill ourselves. You know, I've seen this like the other day. Um, so I have a two-pronged question, I guess, to come off of that. The first is that, you know, what is your experience with that kind of audience member? Do you come across them at all, and do you try to sort of talk them off that proverbial ledge? And the second one is, what are your experiences with like pessimism? Like, do you not often find yourself in a place as a lefty guy and as a person who's trying to help, you know, quote unquote, right? Do you not find yourself sometimes in a position of being like, well, it's all fucked. Like, I don't know how to feel happy, like, or hopeful about anything. So starting with the audience part.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, there are like a decent amount of comments that are just kind of doomer adjacent. I think like a lot of my content is the title is usually going to be very doomer, but
Yeah.
then the way that you come out of the video is hopefully it's actually because obviously these people aren't going to click on videos that are like everything's great.
Yeah.
That wouldn't do very well.
Yeah.
So,
And you're
um,
really good at that because you make the thumbnails like evocative too, in this like very emotional way. And so
mhm.
it's like, oh, you know, like you've broken my heart. I'm just making up a generic Sisyphus title. You've
Yeah,
broken my heart. Period. Lowercase.
exactly.
And then
Oh, that's a great title. Yeah.
it's great. Use it. And then the thumbnail is like this really sad looking drawing. Like, it's very evocative.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean it's deliberate, and then it's kind of like it's actually like working through the reality of you know, why is this particular thing sad, or evoking like a some sense of apathy
Yeah.
or pessimism, and then can you still come out of it at the end with some sort of like hope or optimism, or you know, at least at the very least, because sometimes there's just terrible things happen, there's absolutely no reason behind it, at least some sort of meaning that you can ascribe to it.
Yeah.
It's not like in the sense that there is some greater metaphysical meaning to things, I don't know, but we are really good at that. We are really good at finding meaning in kind of the filth, or the darkness of things. I think that is something that I really like treasure, and I do think people should give themselves more credit usually. And like, you know, you've went through basically everybody, they've went through so many things in life. They're still here,
Mm,
and that's like kind of a, you know, you can ask yourself why, but it's almost like there's this sort of vague desire for self-determination and flourishing at the end of the day. The I guess like the strange hope in like Gabrielle Marcel's terms that I've always been a fan of. And and so I do feel like a lot of my audience is kind of like there is I get the crowd of doomerism, but I do feel like for the most part the comments are quite positive. And if they are sad, they're usually like, oh, this really like resonates with me and like helps me understand my own uh feelings, which I think is a positive experience on its own, even if it ends in tears. But
Right. But you
overall,
and then you have you feel like you've been there as well? I mean, I feel like a lot of times you write from a personal place too. So
yeah, yeah, no, I'd say most of my videos are like self-targeted and self-directed. So, like
so are
I
you
don't,
not just like this really depressed guy? Because like I feel like there's the there's like an aesthetic
um,
to the Sisyphus. There's like a lore of Sisyphus. If you just
I
kind of stumble upon your channel of like this guy must be really sad.
yeah, and I think like people are kind of maybe a little bit surprised when they meet me in real life, and it's like not, I'm not constantly on the verge of like tears and stuff. But partially is because I'm able to just compartmentalize all of that into this onto this channel, and it's
Yeah.
almost become associated with my job in a way. So I'm just like I'm like, okay, being all deep and profound and introspective is like I can turn it on and then I can just for
Just like, oh
you
god,
know
that's work.
yeah, it's like, oh, I gotta be sad. I'm not getting paid to be sad, so I won't be sad. That's not the case,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
um, I yeah, I think in general, I would like to think I've created a life that's like very like whole and like fulfilling with like lots of friends and a lot of like great experiences, and
Oh,
I have a decent amount of hobbies I can do that are nice, and like I'm down sometimes, and I think that I probably experience. I'm probably like a very sensitive person, and so I'm able to capture the lows, I think, pretty well, and it resonates with other people. But there are also like a lot of highs. Like I wouldn't consider myself like a sad or depressed person. Definitely have had those experiences in the past. Um, but yeah, especially now where I am, I don't yeah, I wouldn't identify as being like super.
super
I don't think
down.
I'd be able to like actually put out as much content or do things as much if I was in that sort of place.
It's true. It's true. It's very hard to do things when you're depressed, and that's part of what the like the doomer cycle is this kind of um, semi ideology that sort of intellectualizes the feeling of nothing being worth doing and life not being worth living. Right? It's like,
Mhm.
well, and the brain has a way of intellectualizing whatever you're kind of feeling, and you're kind of stuck in feeling or set on feeling in some cases. Not in
Mhm.
cases of depression. I wouldn't say people try to be depressed, but in cases, for instance, like even when we talk about political ideologies like neoliberalism, like the neoliberal ideology just is just like we just came up with that in a few minutes to fucking justify doing all this other shit, right? And like a lot of political philosophy can be like that, or just philosophy in general can be like that. And the way that people attach to philosophies, right? Like the Broicism trend, right? Is this idea of people taking a reading of Stoicism, which I'm not sure I really like Stoicism overall. Like it's cool. People always try to tie the Stoicism to Buddhism. They're different in a lot of ways, but some aspects of it can lend to the other. There's a sense of the Broicism trend being like people who are trying to sort of have a philosophical justification slash a path to walk down that sort of ideologizes and almost like anthemizes like the feelings and the direction that they already wanted to go in a sense, like I'm not going to care about anything type thing, which of course is also lazy reading, but at the same time it sort of goes to show how a lot of what we do, and I think this goes into a whole other let me put this over here, actually let me not mention that yet, but like do you find also when it comes to ideology and philosophy that a lot of it comes down to stuff that like more primary concerns, let's say, in a person's life, or more primary feelings and experiences, and then the philosophy usually comes afterward, that kind of makes it make sense? Or do you find that sometimes, I mean, I'm sure there's also some degree of this, but do you think it's more prevalent that people um, look for the philosophy to then live their life behind when it comes to people who engage with philosophy in general?
I mean, I definitely believe that we're mostly driven by like affect and like emotion. And there was like some tweet I saw one time where somebody said like the reason why there's so many like guys interested in philosophy, especially, is because guys aren't good at actually expressing their emotion, so they need to like intellectualize it as much as possible, which is kind of funny because if you think
Kind of
about
true.
like Hegel or something like that, where it's these giant, very complex books, and it's like if he just if he could have just had like a beer with a friend or something, I wonder if, the phenomenology of spirit would have existed. But obviously, like a huge reduction. But I do think that that's true. And I think for myself, I was using philosophy for answers because of my primary emotional concerns. And that's why I was more interested in like existentialism,
Mhm.
um, because it was like at the time the very pragmatic, like, and absurdism, like Camus, like how he opens it up with like, all other metaphysical questions don't mean anything. The only question that we should have to answer is like, why don't we just kill ourselves? And that was very dramatic, but also I think
Mhm.
resonant because it is the natural kind of question of doomerism, of why do anything at all? Why not just stop existing and just resign to a life of like pessimism and cynicism? Um, and that, for me, that's still just like a dishonest attempt to gain some sort of control. I don't think you're truly acting as like a nihilist. I think you're still acting in bad faith in a certain way. But I really got into that idea of like a sort of active optimism and almost kind of channeling in a weird way that sort of human stupidity, where
Mm.
despite some of the most like awful conditions, we still nonetheless kind of we operate in the dark. We're still kind of striving in the dark for the most part, and that's
Yeah.
why there that I brought up like the whole idea of subjective destitution in psychoanalysis, and I also think that it's resonant with behavioral activation therapy for depressives. But subjective destitution, there's like kind of four ways in which people encounter despair or the absurd or some sort of like hopelessness. The first one is this like disassociation, where you kind of escape into yourself
Hmm.
and you're just like not going to involve yourself with the external world. So the when you brought up the people that are just like they're not going to go online, I'd say that's a form of disassociation. It's arguably healthier for well-being. And then there's also people that they just kind of they just go online, but they're just looking at like stupid shit. And also
Right.
like people do sometimes they do that with online politics because I don't think online politics is always a representation of genuine politics in a
Right.
way. So that's disassociation. And then there's this other form which is all about historical necessity, and it's when people see themselves as like the revolutionary vanguards, and they basically think if I do this and this, it will create this reality that will solve the issue of the
Mm.
absurd or the hopelessness or the despair. And so you see a lot of kind of ideological justifications for very extreme measures when at the end of the day nothing is guaranteed in life, and you could kill a bunch of people or burn down a bunch of things, and it could be all for naught, or it could bring forth an even worse system or program. So this one would be very critical of most ideological justifications for evil, which just kind of goes back to Becker. And then the third one is the sort of doomerism, where you almost align yourself with the hopelessness and the despair, and you just become actively destructive in a very chaotic sense, and you
Right.
just don't really care at all like what's going on. Like you've kind of given up in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and these are all in varying degrees ways of resigning one's subjectivity in
Mm.
order to escape this hopelessness, this kind of contradiction. The sort of healthy subjective destitution would be you're doing something kind of difficult. You're operating in the dark. You
Yeah.
are doing things in front of you that you think are right. And I think this is where like mindfulness comes in, especially. It's like you are actually paying attention to the present moment, and you're doing those things without any sort of sense of historical necessity. You don't know what exactly this will lead to, you're just going off of like what you know now. I think The Plague by Camus is a very good example and very like resonant with um, kind of the experience of healthcare workers during the pandemic now, where there's just this epidemic happens, and then this doctor has to kind of figure out what to do, and he's a very absurdist. He doesn't really hold himself to any sort of specific religion or any sort of political ideology. He's pretty much just like trying to save people's lives, and it's kind of how he's navigating that is quite interesting. And I think that's for me that's a not only politically, I think that's a very kind of honorable aspiration to have, but also in terms of like the depressed person, it aligns with the idea of behavioral activation therapy, which is almost kind of a fake it till you make it approach, where it's like, yeah, you're depressed. Who knows how long you're going to be depressed for? The first step is just do this thing,
Yeah.
and you might still just feel absolutely terrible doing it, but it's an extremely effective therapy. Like once you actually just start acting, it's so dumb, but it's like once you start acting like you're not depressed. And that's the hard part. It does have very good kind of benefits. That's why sometimes
Right.
like depressed people more or less they have to hit rock bottom or something. Like it's like something where they're like, shit, I have to do something. And you usually see
Yeah.
them start to climb out of it. It's not something that can be like easily like therapeutically like encouraged. Um, so that's my, I guess that was a long-winded kind of argument I have in terms of like how I try to conduct myself and also try to avoid the pessimism. And it's not an entirely like intellectual argument. Um, and I don't think it can be. Like it has to kind of be very like particular to the individual and where they are at their time in life. And once you
Right.
start trying to define exactly what that looks like, I think you start to lose the plot a little bit.
Do you believe humans truly have free will?
Um, I I think that it's one of those things where it's a psychological limitation. I mean, at least in terms of like modern humans, there's an argument that ancient humans actually didn't really believe in free will, and Christianity was like the thing that like brought it forth. So there was this one, I don't know, it's like Janus or something. They analyzed like Homer's texts, and they noticed like it is kind of weird whenever they're like thinking, whenever characters are thinking, they're not really thinking. It's the gods are talking to them, and it was there was this possibility that actually like introspection back then was them thinking that the gods were kind of directing things and telling them what to do. It was like an actual voice in their head.
Right.
And that's like where we would think of free will is we're able to think about something and then do that thing. And then Christianity was, the idea that, humans can kind of choose to sin or not sin, and there's like some level of agency involved that like God gave us. And that might have changed things. But at least in terms of modern humans, whether we have free will or not, it's almost at this time completely like irrelevant in terms of action. And there's like, it's more of like I think a legal discussion because we do need to assign responsibility to people just in order to operate within a society, and we have to suppose some sort of agency. But it could be completely the case that we don't have any agency or responsibility, and certain people are just doomed to do certain awful things, and that's it's completely feasible. But I think that like that drifts into that sort of like um metaphysical kind of questions and stuff that they're like fun to talk about, but yeah, they're not like I don't find them like particularly like fruitful in terms of like a political discussion. We need to at least believe that we're free.
We had to have the idea that we can choose something.
Hmm. And
Right.
like in psychology, like the idea of autonomy, which is do you personally endorse your own behavior? That's pretty much the ethically, that's the only way you can measure it. And of course, that brings up like issues of people that have like internalized, biases, the arguments against like choice feminism, stuff like that. Like,
Right.
it's not a perfect definition, but it's like, it's kind of hard to measure if somebody's free beyond just kind of asking them, how do you feel right now?
Right.
If you try to like say that, oh no, somebody's acting freely and you're an external observer, I think that like causes a lot of issues immediately.
Yeah, I think there's that discussion and that struggle of assigning responsibility for the action, but also having to analyze all the things that come before the action. And the fact
Hmm.
that ultimately, like the whole Buddhist idea of the bicycle, if you take the bicycle apart, at some point, what is it no longer a bicycle? And then that shows like what is really a bicycle other than like a social attribution of something.
Hmm.
Likewise, there's this idea of like that's the non-self thing. There's this idea of like if you take apart all of the things that come behind your decisions, eventually you look and you say, "Oh, this has to like think to do with, like stuff I had no control over." Right?
Hmm.
Like you can say, well, "It was my choice to become a YouTuber. I made that decision. It was out of my own sort of free will, etc., etc." And then at the same time, if you look and you think, well, why did you do that, right? Because there had to be a reason, and then what are the reasons based on? And you take it back, and it's like, well, my mom did this, and like, and like I live here, and I was able to do this, and I saw this video that I could have not seen that video. I could have had a different mother. I could have been born in a different country. I could have,
Hmm.
had a different set of physical properties. I could have whatever, and all these things had to do with completely out of your control that established you then making that decision. So there's like, I guess that becomes more of the question of like sort of moral responsibility, and sort of you know the humanity of like what it means to like assign responsibility in terms of like punishing people. How do we punish people? How do we truly make reparations for when a wrongdoing has occurred? And like carcerality and this kind of idea
Hmm.
versus at the end of the day you do make choices, and you make those choices based on the circumstances. And the whole trick then also, and this is the center of what we talk about with politics, and then also what we talk about with overcoming depression and everything else, it is the struggle of knowing that the environment makes you, and then having to do something as you to change the environment so that the environment can change you, and then you can have to, and that's a constant process.
Hmm.
And that's what I think Beauvoir also talks about it when she discusses like subject versus object, the idea of you as the subject, you, and then the object version of you being completely like not your control. Like it's still you, but it's also nothing to do with choices necessarily. Um, and is that something that you also kind of stumble into when it comes to what you do with your videos? Like, even assigning this like your sort of ruminations, or you don't necessarily give it advice, but like when you go through these discourses about relationships, about depression, existentialism, is there a degree that you also struggle with like, well, ultimately, can this apply to other people, or ultimately like is this just operating off of an assumption that people really do have a choice to be the way that they are? You know?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it can be like all of it could be wrapped up in that like Sartre uh, quote of like freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. So it kind
Mm.
of encapsulates both like the subject and object, or like the environment and the individual. Um,
Mm.
and just yeah, whenever it comes to uh, we get into the discussion of will this really do this or will this really do that, that is where I'm a full proponent of that sort of active optimism or absurdist uh kind of view that you could also just say is it's almost like anti-intellectual in a sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of how much can I make a difference, or how much can I change myself, or will this do this, it's not so much like this idea of like I can be anything or do anything or change the world. It's just I don't know the extent to which like from right now, I don't know the extent to which I can affect or change things until I actually do that thing. And you can be somewhat rational about it, and you can like obviously there's like a feedback, But like at least with this channel, like I get a lot of like emails and messages like constantly, or just comments where people are like, "Oh, this really like made a difference," or "This really like did this or that," which made me feel like I had some influence, which then made me feel like I have some responsibility, and then that made me kind of go on the track of like, oh, right livelihood, and kind of investigating what my platform is doing. So it's kind of a full circle thing. And yeah, maybe everybody's like pre-programmed. Who knows? Like,
Right, right. That's like, what do you do with that at a certain point? That's kind of how
yeah.
philosophy is in general. You know, like
Hmm.
philosophy is great when you're having conversations about like what to do with a specific situation. That's why
Hmm.
philosophers can sometimes have these careers in like PR and like all these different realms where they get to look and say, this is what this philosophy would say. So if you're trying to
Hmm.
think about getting this kind of outcome and being in this kind of situation, you can think about existentialism in this way, right? And that is also very helpful. I think the Sartre quote you use is really helpful because there is a degree of like, yeah, doing what you can with what's been done to you. And what's great about philosophy and productive philosophy is that it gives you the understanding of what your choices are, right? I think a lot of people have this operation where they think that they don't have a choice, or they convince themselves or try to convince themselves that they don't have a choice beyond what they're doing. And that's the fundamental sort of logical flaw that
Hmm.
I think if you don't have a good way to deal with whatever you're discussing, you're going to fall short logically, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I was gonna sort of, I don't know where I was gonna go with that actually. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was gonna. I mean, like it's probably one of the like where Camus and Marx would align, and I like Marx the person, maybe not like the various schools of thought that came after, but just the idea of um, man makes history instead of history makes man, which
Yeah,
is like the exact kind of quote, and that is it's important to kind of consider that, because I do think in terms of doomerism we kind of will just kind of fall back and we forget that we do have some sort of effect. Like we do all share this world, and there is like a I think that's what was maybe so disturbing about the pandemic, and why most people don't really talk about the pandemic that much anymore compared to like how disruptive it really was. Um, is that it kind of reminded us of how closely connected and tied we all are, for better or worse. Um, and it means that we actually have some physical presence in the world. We have some physical effect in the world, and so do other people. And we are interdependent. And what we do is kind of, you know, it can cause a chain reaction. It can lead to things, and it doesn't take like an insane amount of people to actually, rally together or find some courage to do something. But it does kind of spread in the same way that like evil and fear and pain can spread. Also,
yeah,
I think like there is some level of like love and courage and consideration that can do the same. It's just the current systems really kind of push for the former and not so much the latter.
yeah. I think liberal political philosophies like really struggles with assessing the formation like of community of groups working in synergy, people working consistently on the backs of each other in this way that you
Mhm.
describe, and this way we discovered the pandemic. And so that's why, so I think so many people have just literally no idea like what to do about the fact that this happened, and
Mhm.
essentially seem to have in a lot of cases just completely shut it out,
Mhm.
and say, well, just like even the idea, like even the visceral reaction to seeing people wear masks still, it's like this idea of like, you're reminding me of this thing, that of this idea of being mindful of other people, and it pisses me off. And people do
Mhm.
this with vegans. Like, this is a thing we consistently see happen as a response to left-wing ideology. It's just like, why won't you just leave me alone and
Mhm.
let me feel like I have no choice other than to act in this extremely individualist way? Why are you reminding me of my responsibility to other people?
Mhm.
And I think maybe part of what we have to do in order to be generative in these examinations or like interactions with people who think this way is to show people how much better life is when you are able to get rid of that. when you are able to recognize how much you rely on others and how much others rely on you, and like how much happier you can be because of that. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
all convinced, and this is what we do with like ignorance is bliss. Like we're all convinced that if once we know these things and once we recognize these things, it will make us miserable. And so,
Mm-hmm.
the more logical thing is to be happy. And so, in order for us to even get anywhere, we have to just eschew the idea and force ourselves to just then go back into this sort of liberal individualist kind of fake optimism of like, yeah, I don't, it's fine, and it's not going to change anyway, right? And that's just not true. I think it's like it's like cope, it's like bad cope. I think my life has gotten better from understanding how I can help other people. I think there is something fundamental about humanity, that as a human being you become happier, or at least you can become happier, when you have these interactions with other people where you recognize their humanity, and you also recognize that you rely on them and they rely on you, and you see yourself in the other person, right? And all these different things, and the way that that also pans out materially and politically. So I think that goes back to sort of what your project is, right? Is this idea of, I'm not going to talk about philosophy and self-help in this bubble where it's as if there's nothing to do with politics, as if there's nothing to do with any sense of responsibility to others and any sense of trying to do what's right in the world, because they're fundamentally intertwined. And the only reason you don't think it is because it has become so inconvenient institutionally, personally, and economically for people who are choosing the lives they're choosing to acknowledge it as such.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's like sort of,
Yeah.
I guess, a critique of the broicism thing too, in a way. Before we go,
Yeah.
there was like a lot of discussion in the chat asking about the flags behind you. Particularly, I
Right.
think I believe that's a lesbian flag on your over your left shoulder. Is it?
Yeah, that is the lesbian flag. I recently found out that that was the it was one that was made by a creator that was had some not very good past in terms of inclusivity.
Mm.
Was not aware of that. Maybe I have to get the new one, but this was really just like I had a Barbie themed birthday party, and one of my friends who is
Sorry.
lesbian, like we were by like a flag store, and like, oh, there's a bunch of pink on this, so that was that's the extent to the story behind that, I guess.
That's
It's
all it
it's
is.
honestly it's a nice looking flag. Like that's really the
Yeah.
add some color.
Yeah. The other variations of them look good too. If ever you do change.
Yeah, I think the other ones have like orange or something. But
Someone in the chat
yeah,
said like it's a lesbian flag because he's a lesbian. I was like, I didn't know this about Ben, about
yeah, no,
Chrysalis.
that's I mean, also it drives engagement. People ask, people comment. It's all very calculated.
It's a good way to show solidarity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But ultimately it was just
Yeah, it
you
was really
being
just like a circumstantial
you
thing.
being outside again, you being Mr. Grounded
Exactly.
over here, having real
Same thing.
friends. Yeah, just
It's
showing
just
it
a
off to the
flex
rest of
actually at the
us.
end of the day.
Just
Yeah.
you flexing how cool and friendly you are with people. Well, that's good. And the other one I assume is the Canadian flag. Um,
That's a yeah, proper assumption.
Proper assumption.. I didn't see. It's like really, is
Yeah,
it really
yeah.
red? Am I colorblind? Is that a leaf? That's great. I mean, this has been a really great conversation once again.
Yeah, yeah. No, thanks for having me on.
I hope that.
Congratulations on 100,000 also.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming. I
Well
deserve
earned.
more. Yes.
Yeah.
On to 200,000. Um, I titled this stream like "Learning to Be Happy,"
Mhm.
just because I don't know. I was trying to think of stuff that people would be like, "Oh, like that seems like a cool thing to talk about Sisyphus with." But I do think before we go, as a sort of last question, um,
Okay.
sort of last thing that you can just talk about, could you discuss what happiness is and what the real path is to experiencing it properly?
Wow. Yeah, easy last question. It's-
Go for it, philosopher. Shut my camera off.
Um, I mean, in terms of like psychology and stuff like that, it's this was an area that I ended up like having to like look at a lot during undergrad because I was studying like people's idea of the good life, like
Hmm.
just like just other students' idea of the good life and how it mapped onto a lot of psychological indicators. So I read a lot of literature on what do psychologists consider like happiness to be. And there was this like dichotomy of like the good life is either the meaningful life or it's the happy life. And the happy life was very much this idea of like hedonic like happiness, like very like just kind of basic, like it's a subjective feeling. And then the meaningful life is like very it's usually measured in terms of like life satisfaction, and it's you can conceptualize somebody in a concentration camp as living the meaningful life, but you couldn't conceptualize them as living the happy life.
Mm.
And in the same way you can conceptualize like I don't know, like the Wolf of Wall Street guy living like the happy life, but not really like the meaningful life in some way. Just to give examples. But there was like this one interesting study where they had people either set goals that were specifically I'm going to be happy. Like the goal is to become happy, and there was like specific things they were doing in order to be happy. And then other people just set goals in terms of like what did they find meaningful in their lives. And they found that the people that were striving for the more like meaningful goals, as a byproduct, they were experiencing greater levels of like subjective well-being. So like happiness, like that hedonic happiness. The people that were setting goals specifically to be happy were not experiencing like the same levels of joy. So really it goes down to you should never make happiness a goal. It's a state. It's something that comes and goes. Same as sadness. You should really just be striving for things that give you some sort of like fulfillment or meaning at the end of the day, because that's what will stabilize your mood the most, I think. It's that idea of, I think happiness is it's like when you're holding sand, and like if you start like squeezing too hard, all the sand is gonna like fall out. Like it's you have to kind of keep it. You kind of have to keep kind of an open hand to it, and if it comes, don't like grab it and seize on it, because that's that sort of like attachment to things that it
Yeah.
goes back to Buddhism, and it
Yeah.
can ruin it. So
Yeah.
that is I think right the empirical kind of way that I tend to think of happiness.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really important conversation to have, especially as we try to be also good people.
Hmm.
Sometimes that can make us feel like it makes us unhappy as well. And I think the great thing about your channel is that it's one of many reminders that we can be happy, healthy people, and also inquisitive people, and also politically active people working to make the world better. And I think that's what we should all be trying to do. So,
Yeah, I hope so. I think your channel as well. That's
oh,
a similar agenda.
let's hope so. Because I'm
Yeah.
coming for 200,000's coming, and I better be doing something good with this thing. Anyway,
No, I think so.
it's
Yeah.
been great,
Thanks.
Sisyphus.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very
Awesome
much,
talking
Elliot.
to you.
You too.
Have a great day, and thank you to everybody who came by and who said hello and left your awesome comments in the chat. I hope that this conversation was helpful to you at all. Of course, you can check out Sisyphus's channel in the title, and yeah, be on the lookout for his new content. You probably already know. They're,
Yeah,
you're more
great.
popular than I am. So, anyway, have a good night.
Yeah, take care. Bye.